Let's very briefly touch on this because I want us to get to some more viewers' views on what we're talking about. But at the moment in South Africa, we have 1.8 million licensed gun owners. And John, I want to speak to you about this issue because often it's brought out that our problem in South Africa isn't with the person who has a licensed firearm in their home. The person who's gone through the competency test, who has that little card locked up in the safe with their firearm. Those 1.8 million people aren't the people that we need to be addressing.
Yep.
So let's start with you, Adele. I don't know if you agree with that mindset, with the mindset that we actually need to be tackling illegal firearms, and by restricting licensing laws, we're not getting to that.
I disagree, because I think both in South Africa and elsewhere in the world, we cannot separate the legal from the illegal. Most guns are legally manufactured. It's unlike drugs. There's a legal process. It's a legitimate trade between states, their firearm dealers, their processes to regulate owners. And what you see is that the question you have to ask yourself then is, the illegal guns, where did they come from? They didn't just arrive in the illegal pool. They moved from the legal pool into the illegal pool. And the key sources of movement from the legal to the illegal pool is loss and theft from state institutions, which include the military, the police, loss and theft from civilians. That data is disputed, and we can get into that later, but I don't want to do that now. So again, it's most governments across the world recognize that if you want to control your illegal stocks, you have to control your legal stocks. There's such a connection between the two, and it's silly to try and separate them. I think that some of the gaps in our data is, what are the sources? What are the key sources? We don't have enough information, but there it's common sense. If you can, think about it, it's common sense.
Just to touch on what you're saying, coming out of the summit, I think I've been following online, and this is probably one of the things that has struck me most clearly out of it, and that's we need data. We need more information, really. But John, I want you to address that issue.
I shall.
Please.
I shall. One of my closing remarks this afternoon in Parliament specifically was on the issue of the illicit possession of firearms. So often people talk about legal or illegal guns like legal and illegal drugs. There are no such things. A firearm is possessed legally or illegally, and or that firearm is to be used for a legal or illegal purpose. That's the bottom line at the end of the day. It's an object, it is motionless, it means nothing, it cannot do anything by itself, it needs a human being to do something good or something bad with it. The same with drugs. They all refer to drugs. Many drugs and many people who become addicted to drugs have become addicted because of so-called illicit drugs. In other words, prescribed drugs, or even drugs that have not been prescribed that you could in fact buy over the counter in many cases. So that may have started off with something and eventually moved into a certain direction, and eventually they started to touch on the real hard stuff that we refer to as illicit drugs at this stage. Exactly the same with firearms. In so many instances, a person may steal or rob in order to get hold of a firearm. Sometimes he wants to get hold of a firearm or any other object for that matter in order to sell, to dispose of, to get money. Why? To buy drugs. So often that firearm that he steals, or the jewelry that he or she steals, is just a vehicle to get money to sustain himself because of his or her drug addiction. It is quite correct that firearms are diverted from a illicit market to an illicit market. What we are saying, where the research needs to be focused on, is the illegal trade at this stage. And this I mentioned specifically in my closing remarks this afternoon, that we need proper research as to what this illicit market and this illicit trade in fact is. Previously, we emphasized, especially after the civil wars in Mozambique and Angola, we specifically, at that stage I knew, because I was in that particular environment at a particular time, but then I knew that firearms were emerging and being diverted from those areas into South Africa. Secondly, that prescribed safe, you cannot just take the key of that prescribed safe and put it on top of the safe. You must have control over that key. So in other words, if your kid knows where you keep the key and your kid can get hold of that key, opening the safe and so forth, then you basically, you have now you certainly did not obey the law, because that's not what the law says. The law says you must have sole control over that safe and the key to that particular safe. I believe that is very important, and we must make sure that that system works. We don't need an additional system for that. By reducing or limiting the number of firearms, one is not going to achieve that. If you stick to the basic principles, in other words, if you make sure that the person is competent, if we make sure that the law is properly enforced in that regard, in other words, when a person loses a firearm due to negligence, when a person does not safeguard his or her firearm and a child gets hold of the firearm, make sure that that case is properly investigated, that case is properly prosecuted, and that person who was irresponsible is properly charged in terms of our law. Because what is important, we've mentioned that on previous occasions, together with the right to possess a firearm in terms of the law of South Africa, together with that, there's a correlative obligation, a heavy responsibility on you as a firearms owner in order to safeguard that firearm and to use it where it is safe and where it is legal to use. And that is what we try to emphasize. So from SAGA's perspective, we look a lot at education of our membership. We go in fact much further than that. Many years ago already, we have drafted certain pamphlets, certain posters, in which we indicated, for instance, safety with regards to children. And we indicate a very simple message to children, that if you find a firearm, or anything that resembles a firearm, don't touch. That's the first lesson, don't touch. Leave the room, you and your mates, call an adult. Now, in many cases, that's not going to work, because the adult may be a criminal all by himself, but that is a basic lesson that we can go into. Now, we don't like that, because the firearm should not be there in the first instance. And that is where the responsibility comes in. But unfortunately, like with most education, teaching and so forth, it takes years to get the message across. But that does not mean that we should stop getting that message across. I think that is important, that there must be a continuous education and mentoring process in this regard.